Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. For those of you just joining us, if you have any questions, please put them into the question box and we'll get to them during the presentation. Also, just a note, we are recording this session and it'll be available on the EUG website in the next 24 hours. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Brian Ellis, who is with us from Docket, to tackle labor shortages head on, digital transformation to increased efficiency and rapid ROI in under 90 days. Thank you for joining us, Brian.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody. And kind of like you heard there, like I'm Brian, I'm the founder of Docket. And my background is that uh, I was an Epicor consultant for about 20 years. I had co-founded a manufacturing technology consulting company called Sabre Logic back in 2002. And so, over that time, I worked with hundreds of different types of manufacturers and saw a lot of different shop floors and different processes and things like that. And, so that was kind of the start of my career. And then the second part of my career has really been focused on building software for manufacturing and, really based on kind of that foundation and that experience and looking at it and saying, what's the kind of software that I think is missing in a manufacturing environment. And so that led to building Docket. So, Docket the first concept of Docket really came out of the idea of what would shop floor software look like that was useful for the operator. I was obviously used to MES and I made a lot of MES customizations and things like that to try to fit it better into different types of manufacturers. And and there's always a lot of difficulty to it. You can use the UD tables and things like that, but for a lot of companies, they're really trying to build their processes. So like, MES was doing a lot of data collection, but they really looked at it and said, like, how do we manage our processes around this? So, our goal was to make Docket and really focus on, both how we can empower those manufacturers, give them a lot of benefit of process control on the shop floor, while also like elevating that workforce. So providing software for them that's easy to use, that's easy to follow, while helping those manufacturers, really maximize the value of their workforce by getting the most out of them by providing a system that allows them to build their shop floor processes and guide those operators through those shop floor processes. And as we kind of talked about, and I think as everybody recognizes right now, the problem of labor. Every manufacturer I go to, it's a problem, and like both the available labor pool and that they're losing a lot of experience. And the problem with that is that a lot of that experience and a lot of those experienced manufacturing operators, like the processes were in their head. And like how each company did things was really a tribal knowledge based system that grew over time. And those people who were experienced, like they knew it, they could come in and do it. But the new people coming in, like, okay, how do you make sure that how do you close that kind of knowledge gap that's existing and that's growing inside of that labor pool that companies have? But in addition to that, so that's kind of like the labor challenges. There's like this lack of process control and visibility that I've seen. And I've seen a lot of companies, they'll try to solve it by using paper. And so they're going to put all these paper systems in place because there was no system that actually helped them define and manage that process as they go through there. And this actually, I mean, this would actually manifest itself in a bunch of different ways. I'd actually been to manufacturers before, and I could talk to operators who run the same machine and ask them a question and get different answers depending on who trained them. Again, because it was this tribal process that grew out there, there's a lot that relied on who did the training as they kind of went through there, and that leads into some missed opportunities for growth. I think a lot of companies end up having more problems with like rework and issues like that that are be better controllable if they were able to ensure that their processes were always followed. And and the last part of that is kind of like the lack of affordable technology solutions. Um, I've spent my entire life in like the mid-market manufacturing. Like my dad worked for a machine shop for a while. And in that space, you can't afford these like multi-year rollouts and things like that. So a lot of that manufacturing technology that was being created for these like large manufacturers. And they were too complex and it was too expensive and it was too hard to manage and things like that. So, when we were looking to build Docket, we're looking at that and saying, okay, we see this gap in the software market where, these manufacturers could do a lot better by if they had, if they could enforce their processes and provide a really simplified interface for their operators. But we need to be able to do it in a way that is easy to implement and affordable to implement. Which, as anybody knows, I mean, in software in creating software, that can be a difficult challenge to balance the two of those. So, so Docket, when we talk about processes and we talk about shop floor and we talk about all of that, I really consider that the core of Docket is that it's an industrial workflow platform. So like, in the front office, a lot of people got used to like workflow software. You could imagine like your Asanas and things like that they were using to manage their processes. But those products were not right for the shop floor. So we took a lot of those same concepts and we wanted to focus on building a manufacturing workflow platform. And that allows companies to define, deploy, and enforce their best practices, streamline those processes, and turn them into paperless operations. Again, get rid of that paper, get rid of those tribal systems, and build a digital system out of that, and really empower those people to do their best work and drive to the best outcomes. This is another core key part of my experience is I spent so much time on the shop floor side of things, working with different operators and things like that. And what I found is like, in the vast majority of these companies, like people want to do a good job. And a lot of times when things go wrong, I think it's more of a failure of a system than it is the employee. So, I really believe that by giving, like by providing better tools, we can drive those better outcomes. So when I look at that, again, like one of the things we talked about or one of the things I had mentioned there was, this idea of how do we get this going fast? How do we get this in and running? And one of the ways that we do that is, we have these different templates of these workflows that we can start off with. And the way that Docket works is it's not like a cathedral style system where you put it in and then everybody has to be running it at once. Docket was really built in such a way that you could focus on one operation, one process on the shop floor, and then you could build on top of that. And then as these processes connect to each other, then you start seeing, growth across the entire operation. You start seeing a lot more, as these processes kind of intermingle, like how inventory management and production tie together and how production and quality and even shipping and receiving and inventory management, like all of these pieces end up connecting together, but you don't have to like roll it all at once. You can really focus on like what are the big problems that each shop floor is facing and how we can solve that. So, how do we do this is I've, is probably a good question to kind of get into. And I'll get into a demo and I'll show everybody a little bit of like, both a solution and then kind of break down how we get to a solution like that. But, this all starts for a lot of companies in their ERP system. So, for instance, like I could put a BP, a data directive. I actually do this, like a data directive on like when a job is marked as released, or a method directive when a purchase order is saved, or, when a cycle count is created, like whatever that ends up being, work orders, purchase orders, customer orders, service calls, RMAs, rework, inspection, cycle counts. Like we have all these different things that we can turn into processes. So what happens is in Epicor, we're going to wait for that to happen, and when that triggers, then you push that data into Docket. And so that could be like a traveler, or whatever that ends up being. And as soon as you push that to Docket, that turns into a workflow. And so that's how you can kind of take any of these processes that you maybe that you have in your ERP system right now, and then you can build a workflow around that. So basically, we take that data and it transitions into what we call as a work item. So we call it a work item because that could be a job, that could be a purchase order that needs to be received, that could be a customer order that needs to be shipped, that could be parts that need to be moved, whatever that ends up being. So we call that a work item. And then that work item exists on a workflow. And so I think this is like a really key part to how we take this big idea of a workflow, and break it into such a way that it's into these like easily digestible chunks. So the first way that we do that, and I'll show this, is that we think about a workflow. So let's say like that could be, running a certain type of machine, or that could be like receiving a purchase order. And we break that down into what we call the stages of it. So for instance, like running a machine, maybe that is, setting the machine up, running a first article, performing an inspection, running the rest of them, et cetera. So we think about it in that way, that we turn, the workflow just into those discrete stages first. And we just try to think of what all of those stages are. Then for each of those stages, we have this work item that we've taken from the ERP system, and we look at that and we say, okay, what is the criteria for when a work item can start and complete each of these stages? So again, for instance, in like the job example, I can't run it until setup is finished. I can't perform the first inspection until I ran the first article. Different things like that. So we just define what the criteria is for each of those stages. And then in each stage, we say, what are the actions that the operator performs in the stage, which updates the work item. And then because they update the work item, that then, is going to change the criteria on those stages. So again, we talked, like there's the criteria of the stages, you update the work item, updating the work item changes the criteria of the stages, and then that turns into a loop. And what's cool about this is that because we think on it, it's like we don't think about it like in a linear workflow, which a lot of people would be familiar with. We think about it in a non-linear way. We think about, each work item and all of its possible stages. And then, so based on that, like each work item is going to be considered, and it's going of which stages it can run at any time. And what's cool about that is it allows us to do things like, managing rework. So a lot of companies want this, I'm running this machine and I'm going to mark so many parts as scrap, but I want the opportunity to rework that scrap ahead of time. So those parts, instead of just moving on to the next operation, maybe they move into a rework bucket. And then after they rework, those parts may be scrapped or they may fall back into the workflow. So we get to track them that way. Um, Parallel processing for efficiency. This allows, like, I could be doing that rework while I'm still finishing that operation. And I think this is also a kind of a fit. One of the things that some companies struggle with like a paper-based traveler, is that you can't really split it. But in this case, I cut the first 10 of these. I want to start painting them before I finish cutting the next 30 of them, or whatever that ends up being. Dynamic workflow adaptation. So, as specs change, materials change, anything like that, you can trigger things to happen in the workflow. So it doesn't necessarily follow the existing pattern, but that workflow, based on those changes, it can reflect them quickly and get us back onto track for it, and allow us to do integrated quality control checks at every level as we go through there. So, quality, I think, is like a critical piece of all of this. Is, you don't want to waste that labor. We already talked about the fact that that labor is in short supply, so we want to make sure that those hours are used effectively. So, we're able to put these different quality check steps in as we go along there. And so I'm going to switch over now, and then I'll talk a little bit about like how we integrate into the ERP system. And I'm going to switch over into the actual Docket interface itself. So if you kind of imagine on your shop floor, your operators could have like tablets that exist at their work center, or anything, or like, existing kiosk systems, whatever that ends up being. We've got this technology on the floor. And the operator logs in, and the first thing that they see are what we call the stations. So this is the kind of work that they support. So you could see that, it might be like a department, which with actual like work centers and things like that, like CNC machining. It might be a process like maintenance requests or like a pick, pack, and ship or whatever. Basically, what we're trying to do is for the operator is giving them the ability to understand like what work needs to be done. So I'm going to create a work item in here. And again, for the most part, this would likely just be pushed from Epicor like directly into the system that would create this. We have the ability here to also define these, like to be able to create forms. So you can create work items, which is nice for like processes you have that may not have like an equivalent in the ERP, for like maintenance requests, for instance, like if we don't have something like that, or, tracking remnant inventory, things like that. So I'm just going to put in a job ID. I'm going to say it's EUG demo one, EUG, not Doug part, EUG part. I'm going to say like 10. Obviously, this would just come off your traveler. Our ship date and a description for that part. And I hit the create button, and that's going to create a work item for me. So again, the operator's not doing that. The operator would come in and they'd click on their station, and then they're going to see all the work that's sitting at that's ready to work at that station. So we pull that schedule in and we reflect it into these cards on what we call the station board. So these are operations that are ready to be run at CNC machining. Now, one of the things that we have here as well is a manager mode that allows you to define certain like supervisors and things like that who can come in, and they can just, drag and drop and change the priority of these cards. And these cards and that's going to be reflected for everybody who shares that station. They could also click directly onto them and assign that work directly to individual operators. So they're going to see that assignment as it comes in. So, a tool for those supervisors really to be able to like organize the work and both prioritize it and then manage assignments. Now you see that these cards are fully configurable. So like you can change these around and you can highlight the information that's important at each station. So, for CNC machining, I'm highlighting the quantity required, the ship date, maybe I'm highlighting the type of steel that we use or different things like that. Everything about Docket was built around rapid configurability so that a company could tailor it to what they needed it to do without, again, it being like a bunch of programming and things like that. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to run this job for EUG Demo 1. And when I click on it, now we've broken it down into the stages. I've got a setup process, I've got a run process, and I have an optional step for if I need to rework parts. So I'm going to come in and I can't start running until I do setup. One of the things, just a quick note, on every work item also has comments that we can track. And that follows it through the workflow, allowing operators to communicate to operators or allowing like team leaders to communicate to operators about a given job and things like that. So I go in to start the setup process, and now we've broken that down into the actions that we want that operator to take. They need to prep the machine, they're going to do tooling setup, they're going to prep the material, We're going to load the program and we're going to review and sign off. And you see, I can't complete this until everything's been done. So if I come in, first thing is I'm going to prepare the machine. So I click on that action, and then that loads what we call widgets. And these widgets are configurable based on like what you want, what the person needs to be doing. So here I have some instructions about how we want the machines, the CNC machine set up, links out to files or anything like that that we may want to, give the operator easy access to as they're running this process. And then we have a simple form down here where we want the operator, in CNC machining, maybe we have a couple ones. So I'm going to say, CNC one, and then I have a machine status down here where I'm going to say it's either, ready or it needs maintenance. So we're going to say it's ready. And then I'm going to go down to my tooling setup. We describe the tooling on the mill. And then we have another form here where we can just do a simple pass fail. So I'm going to say like, yep, I checked all of these, all of the different tools that I'm going to need to run the CNC. So I can save that. Now, if I try to skip ahead to review and sign off, I can't because we still have things that we've not done yet. So again, it's really, and I obviously couldn't complete it anyways. So it's really about being able to control that process. You get into material prep, maybe we're showing off the traveler, like the type of material that you need, maybe the default bin locations, any information like that that we want to highlight. And I'm going to come in and maybe I need to record a lot number as a part of that. And lastly, it's going to ask me, did I load the program? And give me information about the program load. So I'm going to say, yes, I did all of that. Now that I did that, I'm going to come up to here and I can see that, yep, all of those things have been, are successful. So in this case, I'm going to sign off on it, and this is one of the things that, that I like about Docket is that this idea of being able to add accountability through the process. So in the background, we're doing a couple things. One is we're tracking all of the labor. So from the time that I click to say that I'm starting the setup until I complete it or until I stop the process, we know how long that process is taken and we can push that labor back into Epicor. But also like each of the actions that were taken along the way and what those answers were. So now that I signed it, now I can complete that setup. And now that I've completed setup, I can run the CNC mill. So now I've got two actions here, report good parts and report bad parts. Report good parts, maybe I have a little traveler information up here, notes that we want to highlight, anything that we typically have off the traveler, and then just a section so they can come in and say how many parts they did. So, maybe I completed 5, a little while later, I come in and I complete the last 5 of it. You can, again, we're tracking each of these actions that the operator takes. And now that I've completed all 10, I could run complete. Or now I can report my bad parts. And here, we shows the CNC like some rejection reason codes, provide a description about it. Maybe also, we can provide videos in these, or we can provide pictures or anything like that. And then come in, and then maybe I need to record that. Actually, 3 of those parts had tool marks, and 2 of those parts were chipped. So save that. And now I can track my rejected parts down here as well. And because I rejected some parts, if I run complete on this, now I can rework those parts. And I didn't even have to complete the run. As soon as I marked that some of those parts needed reworked, this stage opened up for me. You can actually run multiple stages on one job at the same time. We also have this tagged so that you can see that there's rework that's necessary for this job. So we have a really simple process here for the operator to come in and say like, okay, I need to rework these parts. I can see that 3 of them had tool marks, 2 of them were chipped. Because of that, I need to maybe those tool marks buffed out, but the chipped parts I couldn't really do anything about. So this gives me a chance to come in and approve or reject the remaining pieces. I come in, save that. I've completed all of that. There's no more rework that I need to do. And because of that, I can complete my rework process. because I completed everything that was necessary for this operation, that card is completely off the is off my board now, and I would just move on to like what the supervisor said was the next thing to do, the next operation that we want to perform there. Now I want to show one more example before I dig into a little bit of kind of like showing how this is done. And so I'm just going to create another one. I'm just going to create like I'm just going to say UG broke part 1, 2, 3. I'm going to say we need to do a ton of those. So I'm just creating another job here really quick. And the main reason I wanted to do that was I'm going to come into this new job that I had created here, and I'm going to go through this process. And during machine prep, Gmail. In this case, I'm going to say in the machine status, actually, it needs maintenance. So, I looked at all, I went through my checklist, and something's not quite right. So I'm going to mark that it needs maintenance there. And so one of the things that can happen is that these workflows can interconnect to each other. So I've got another station here for maintenance requests. So maybe this is for my maintenance workers to be able to come in, and we could actually have this up on a board so they could see like which machines are marked as need maintenance right now, where an operator might be having some challenges. So we just did this EUG mill. So I have one stage, I'm going to perform the maintenance on it. And I come in and, I made a really, really simple workflow for this. And, I could just put my notes in here. And then I could either say, it's in progress, complete, I need a supervisor, I need quality. If I say I need a supervisor and then I stop working on this, then this board is automatically updated and it shows that we need a supervisor as a part of that. So again, you can kind of imagine how in like the shop floor TVs, you could have this up and you would be able to see cards move from to do to in progress, and these statuses be updated along as they go, so that we have like a really clear vision of everything that's going on. Now, this one, if I come in and say it's complete, that allows me to complete the stage. That was the only stage that I had. And so that maintenance request is now completed. Um, so, and I'm going to go into just a little bit more and a quick kind of look behind the scenes of how these things are built. And then I'll finish up and we'll take some questions here shortly. So I'm switching over to our admin interface. And so this is where you like manage your users and do all of that. This is also where you administer your different workflows. And so, when we were looking earlier, like here's my demo workflow that we had been looking into. And you can start seeing how we break that down. The station was CNC machining, so you can have multiple stations on there as well, like if you wanted to track as it moved through. And then I broke it down into setup, and that has each of the different actions, and each of the actions have the widgets. And then I had run, and then I had my rework stages on there. So again, when I talked about that, is like you take one workflow, so in this case, running a CNC machine, and you break that down into the stages, and then we're going to look at each stage. So for instance, if I look at the stage for running the CNC mill, then I have validations that are going to say, can it be started or can it be completed? So if I look at like the can be started, I'm looking to see if setup CNC mill is done. And if that's true, then I can start this running this stage. And if I look at, is it marked, is it been run complete? So I'm looking at how many I've completed versus how many I needed to do. And if that's greater than or equal to, then can be completed as true. So you break the stages down, and then from the stages, you provide those validations to say for each work item as it goes through here, when can that stage be started? When can that stage be completed? And then as you go through there, then we have, the actions. This is just like the card that somebody clicks. And then you have the different widgets. So like this is a markdown widget where we provided that step-by-step process for the operator to see, like, what the machine preparation checklist is, or something, or anything like that. So, it can, like, building a workflow can seem daunting in the beginning of it. But when you take it that approach and you really think about that workflow, not as the entirety of the workflow, but you think about that workflow in the case of like each of those stages, and then you just kind of you take one big problem and you break it down and you break it down, and then by the end of it, all you're thinking about really is like, okay, what do we need to do to set up a CNC mill, or how do we manage that rework, or whatever that ends up being. Now, switching back over to here for a quick second, like, and again, that process now, as you saw, like for maintenance requests, that could be for things like purchase order approvals, that could be for moving inventory, that could be for cycle counting. You can really take any of those shop floor transactions, and using that concept of breaking it into stages and then breaking those stages into actions, you can create workflows for just about anything on your shop floor, any kind of processes that you have. And we have templates to get you started on any of those, where you could just start off with, like, our standard production, standard purchase order approval, whatever that ends up being. And then for us, like, the other part, obviously, this is an Epicor webinar. So an important part of that is how this integrates with existing systems. So how that happens is that, we talked about this earlier. You push data from Epicor, and that could be BPMs, that could be files that you generate, that could be whatever you want to be there. You push that data to us, and our rules engine runs and chunks that and says, like, okay, this is a new job, or this job has a quantity change. How do we update that work item? And then as I was going through, maybe once I've completed setup, there's integration triggers that are going to send data back to Epicor. So in there, it's kind of like how, kind of like how method directives work, or like a BPM generally works. Because in there you could say, like, when a user executes a widget, or when a user completes a stage, or when a user, does dot, 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 um, then I want you to do this. I want you to pass this data to Epicor. I want you to call this Epicor function. I want you to generate this file, whatever that ends up being. So there's a bunch of, like, features in here, I think, that are impressive. That idea about being able to build these, like, responsive digital work instructions. One of the things that you can do is like those widgets, you can control if they're visible or not based on that work item. So that way you can say, like, all right, well, if this material is heavy, then I need to tell them to go get it, go get a fork truck. And if it's light, then they can just get a hand truck. Like different processes like that you can go through. And so you can really make those work instructions responsive based on whatever that work item is that you have. Integrate the inspections as a part of that. Data collection is really at the core of what we do, because we track all of that data in the background, and we can push that data back into Epicor, or make it available into other database reporting or things like that. Provide that, like, comprehensive auditing, because we have a full trail of everything that's been done there. It's not just that, like, Bob completed 10 of these, but we have all of that information that we have, and the ERP integration, that rules-driven workflow, that industrial workflow, and then those process templates to get you started. So, I think, like, the benefits to people going digital is that you're going to ensure that those processes are being followed. You take that tribal knowledge and you can really systematize it. You get better quality control, because you're ensuring both that those processes are being followed, but with that inspection, but with those in-process inspections, you can make sure that, an operator is signing off on these parts as they move forward. Simplify compliance by giving you, like, that extra level of auditing. Get those kind of predictable results at lower costs. I always, one of the things I would always say is consistent process leads to consistent outcomes. Assuming that your materials are about the same, then the difference really comes down to process. So if the more that we can manage that process and control that process, the more consistent our outcomes and more predictable those outcomes are going to be. Get all that real-time data so you can see all of those things happen, inventory and production data, having that board to see who's working on what jobs are running right now, what jobs are running next, and improve the onboarding and training. Like by removing the tribal knowledge piece of it, you can improve, workers' time to live by giving them processes that they can walk through and guiding them through that process. So quick, kind of like, again, how these things typically work. And we can dig more into this as you guys want, but like, you're really looking at a rapid launch on these things because what we do is we take that process, we break that process down, and then really try to focus on getting that one process in place. But as you can see, it's not like it's not an overly complex way of building a workflow. We really take that and then we break that down into the individual stages, build those stages out, and then you're getting hands on it really quickly. Um, Pricing is simple as well. Like we have a one-time setup fee that's going to be based on the number of workflows that you're launching. And then there's just a simple platform fee and then a license fee on a per user per month basis. You can cancel anytime with 90 days notice. Like we really try to be easy to work with as much as we possibly can. So what you're getting into, and our goal is to is to increase value for everybody. So I think with that, now would be a good time for questions. Thanks everybody for waiting as we get through there, but I can answer any questions.
Yeah, perfect. Brian, Henry asked, is Docket able to integrate via REST v2 in both directions, as sender for
Yep.
calls from Epicor and as a server for calls from Epicor?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. We use the REST interface for all of that.
Also, how are widgets such as those supporting part, job, op, report, user managed and administered in terms of versioning and recalling?
Mm. Yeah. So, in our side, like you kind of saw the ability to how those widgets were there. You can take those widgets and you could publish an entire new workflow. Like if you have strict control on those processes, and maybe you want to make sure that that before you deploy any changes, that there's a full sign off onto it. You can deploy that whole process at once. You could deprecate an old widget by basically saying this widget's no longer valid and then replacing it with a new widget. Or if you don't have that level of control, as soon as you make a change to a widget that's out there, it's going to be immediately reflected for everybody once you publish that workflow. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, would an inspection report at operation be included? Likewise, it was a follow-up from the previous question. Would those
Yeah.
reports be associated to the job operation work center and user for analytics? I think I know that answer, but I'll
Yes.
take it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So we track it from, like it would be attached to first off, like the work item. So that could be like job, assembly operation, or part like lot ID or part serial or whatever you want to track it in that way. That forms like the digital twin to us as it goes through there. And then as it goes through each station, we're attaching the quality reports to that. We're attaching the, quantities built and who built them and how long it took. We attach all that information onto it so we can audit it later.
Got it.
Are
And
there any other questions?
how is the part attributes tracking included serialization accommodated, including serialization accommodated?
Yeah. That's a really great point of what we have in like built into here because there's a couple different things. Um, like because it acts like a digital twin, you could, if you wanted, you could either track each part serial as it goes through. Like, let's say it's a VIN, and I want to track everything that happens on a given truck, or whatever as it works through the process. The work item could be that VIN, and it moves through those operations, it moves through those processes as it pushes forward into it. Or if it's the job, then we attach those to the work, or like we attach it to the work item. So you'd be able to know that those serials are attached to it, or that those lots are attached to it. They belong as kind of like a child object to that work item. So as they move forward, we inherently know all of that information. You don't have to re-enter that information in or anything like that, because it becomes an attribute of that work item.
Does the platform have real-time dashboard outline employee performance? I can take a swing. Brian, and then lean on you. When we talk about the audit level data that we are tracking and everything and every action and the time against that job, as you can see when we go through there, it's very clean, it's very simple, it's very easy for the operator to use and follow. You don't see things like the timers and stuff like that. We have some basic reporting that's specific to whatever that function or the station that a customer is using. We also, though, collect all of that data from the time against each job and everything in between. And a lot of our customers commonly have things like Power BI or Tableau that the company might use for reporting. And Docket can very easily push all of that data to those existing systems and give you guys an easier way to manipulate that data and view it from there. Brian, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I just think we have kind of a combination of like some in-app dashboards, and those are really, oriented toward what's happening right now. And then there's like the rest of it, which is like the analytics of that kind of like audit and things like that. And yeah, for most customers in that case, we're pushing that information to them so they can use existing reporting platforms to be able to report against that information.
Um, where are your customers seeing initial ROI most commonly by utilizing Docket?
Yeah.
Um, Great
I,
question. I would say the few most commonly, we start in a bunch of different processes. It's always easier to pick, maybe it's the end of the quality inspections or embedded process inspections. And a lot of the times, customers of ours will look at what's their rework that's being caused by the operator not taking a photo, or they're not checking off the piece of paper or doing things like that. And if it's just can Docket come in and apply an action where they cannot move on unless this action is done. Things like that, where we talked about the ruling and the widgets that we can perform easily and put into Docket. So they'll look at the savings against that. I'd say the most common is just the struggle of the manual time that current operators on the floor are taking to go to a kiosk at the end of the day and manually report into their ERP the jobs that they completed, the material that was used. And with an addition to the manual time that's being taken to do that, there's a lot of errors, and a lot of our customers initially, before even starting with Docket, looked at the variances between the material and labor. And then I'd say from there, quality, rework, onboarding and training, travel knowledge capture, things like that. Did you add anything,
yeah,
Brian?
I would kind of, I mean, I'd maybe, for a lot of our customers, like it's going to depend on them. So for instance, one of the companies that we're potentially working with right now, like their process was at the very last thing they wanted before parts go out the door, somebody to take photos of them. So it's like what we were basically doing was, once they release a job, we know that they're going to be building 10 parts and they need to take pictures of those 10 parts. So that was the workflow for them. Really, really simple to get them started, but it was critical to them to make sure that they had those photos, because they was both quality assurance, and it was also, it was something they could rely on later, if somebody's like, I didn't get this part, you'd be like, oh, here it is, it's in the shipment or whatever that ends up being. But sometimes it's surprising. Another customer that we're talking to right now, like like one of their biggest problems was managing how operators on the floor requested parts from the parts cage. They were from an inventory cage. They were doing it, on pieces of paper, and there's like a delay because like they'd fill out this piece of paper, they'd send it to the cage would get it, it would sit on a clipboard, and then eventually they'd return it. And then from there, like, as we presented that as a first workflow for them, and then we talked to them again, and they said, so there was two stages there, right? Like requesting parts, delivering parts. And they're like, well, actually, we have this other problem that this could help with. And that's that the people receiving the parts, sometimes they were disagreeing and saying like the cage didn't send them these parts or whatever. So like, okay, now there's a third stage in there. And that's like, okay, now as you're receiving those parts, perform a quick count. And to them, that was huge because it was creating all this strife, it was causing all these problems. And there's so much finger pointing of like, is it the people fulfilling the inventory? Is it the requests going in, whatever that ends up being? And we were able to really get them onto one truth, onto one platform that tracks that for them.
Another great question around just getting started and what implementation looks like. I'll touch on post sale before you guys would even decide to work with Docket. Everything that you saw today and all the different use cases, a lot of that's driven by the way that Docket is so modernly built and how easy it is for us to configure and dynamically change things to fit the customer specific process. So we do that similarly in the sales cycle. So if any of you on the call were interested in how would our process X, Y, or Z be approached in Docket, what would that look like? Usually that entails maybe sharing a travel or sharing a quality inspection, some of the things that you'd want to ask. A lot of the times, customers in our sales cycle, if you will send us a list of this would be the ideal situation, and we might go back and forth a few times and say Docket can solve this in this way, this way, and this way, but we can't do that, and we're very honest about that. And then we actually mock up your process in our platform. We do that with every potential customer. So from an interest standpoint, if anyone on the call is interested in doing that, that's the step we usually would take. And then Brian, maybe I'll let you touch on what it looks like from we've identified the problem that we want to get started with. They signed with
Mm-hmm.
Docket. What are the kind of things that look like from there to implementation?
Yeah, great. Great question. So what happens is, post sign, like we're ready to do this. Like we've identified a problem and we're going to dig into it a lot deeper. So what happens is we have a call where I'm on the call with you and our operations leaders on the call, and we talk about the problem. We talk about exactly like what I was talking about, like the material fulfillment process that I described there was, understand not from a technical standpoint level or anything like that, but the reality of the problem. And then we do that process that I kind of outlined there, like, okay, we understand that, and now we're going to break it into the stages that makes up. And then from there, we're going to break it into, okay, at each of these stages, what are the actions that the operator is going to take, and what are the widgets that we need to support those actions. And we basically come out and there's a functional requirement that gets made as a part of that completely outlines how the entire workflow works, gives us a chance to collaborate on it, and our goal, we always say our goal there is to get about 80%. And then if it sounds like, yeah, like that makes sense, then we go and we build that, like we turn that from a document into a workflow. And then the first versions of it are non-integrated, so you can get an access to it. You can start with hands-on, get it in front of operators, get feedback on the process, and we can tweak really rapidly. You saw in that builder, I can make these changes to these workflows, and the changes are only like constrained to each stage because that's how we broke it down. So we tweak on all those stages until we feel like we get them right. And then once that's done and the workflow feels right, then we basically wire it up. So here's data coming from Epicor, and then that's turning into those workflows. And then on the other side of things, identifying those points, those trigger points that we want where we want to push data back into Epicor, and go from there. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but really, I mean, that's a part of what we wanted to do here was make something that was simple. And then once you get it, we're obviously happy to continue supporting you. You'd have access to the builder if you wanted to tweak it, or we continue working with you. And then after we do the first solution, we work on the next one. We work on, we just want to continue working forward with you to digitize as much of your shop floor as you would see value in.
Yeah, that was great, Brian. I think just coming off of that, what did I see here? One was how do we kind of, is it all workflows or is it separate workflows? So when Brian touched on the pricing, and I think something that's important to call out is what really matters to Docket is just growth, and that comes from every part of your shop floor. That's what we want for all of our customers. That's usually what customers come with. They talk about 3 or 4 different processes, and then we kind of go, okay, what's the one that's the biggest pain right now? What's the one that maybe you've tried to solve with a complex MES build out, or maybe you tried a different software, but it didn't integrate well to your ERP and it was just a pain, and it was a pain for the operators. Let's start there. Once we're live, and we're doing this with current customers, maybe some of you are on the call and you know this, once we get you live in that initial process, whether it's the quality inspections or it's shipping or receiving or it's maintenance in some type of way, we're going to just work with you all on what's the next thing we want to attack with Docket. And we set milestones in place to say, okay, so we've started with the embedded quality checks. Let's go to fabrication. And we're building out that workflow. The only cost outside of the annual platform fee for us that you guys would incur is just adding users. It's because of how we're built, it's not a big lift for us to get those workflows running with you in other parts of your process. So for that, we don't charge an additional implementation, and we don't charge anything more to the platform. It's just the users.
Yeah, and our goal is to train you as a part of that too. Like we're always there to support, and we'll always be happy to do as much of that as necessary to help you build these out. But also, like, as a function of that, training you to understand, like, how you could change build any of these processes.
Yep. And I would just say, if you wanted to put a number against it, most of our recently onboarded customers are seeing 30 to 45 days before they're up and running. But of course, we'll move at the pace that our customers want to as well. I want to give, looks like we still have about 20 people in here. Are there any other questions that anyone wants to put into the chat? Not seeing any.
All
Oh,
right.
I got one. Wait. Henry, you're welcome. Thank you for being very engaging. If anyone is interested in seeing what their workflow might look like in Docket, you can see the link there. Just go on our website, fill out a contact us, and we'd be happy to set something up.
Absolutely. I appreciate everybody watching today. I really appreciate EUG, like the work that you guys do, the opportunity that you have for us to showcase, the things that we've been working on, and that the group and everything that you guys do to support it. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you guys for always taking the time to come on and talk to our members. We appreciate it too, and always nice to see you and catch up.
Absolutely.
Everybody have a good weekend.
Great. Happy Friday,
Thank
everybody. Have a
you.
great weekend. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.